So Vitals was the most requested session here at Playtime today. So we're going to kind of assume that you all know about Vitals. I'm going to tell you what we've been up to recently. Also, we're going to go into a bit more detail about what Tian announced earlier. And then Fergus is going to come up and he's going to tell you a little bit more about why you should really, really care about your Vitals. So first thing, I made a bit of an assumption that you do all know about your Android Vitals, right? Can I show of hands, maybe? Everybody who's using Android Vitals? Not bad, but I can see, quite a few here that didn't put their hands up. So just for you, Android Vitals, it's 15 engineering metrics covering 5 different performance areas that really give you insights into the things that users care about the most. So it represents the performance and quality of your app as experienced by real users on real devices in the real world. And most importantly, it gives you as business leaders, maybe people outside of the engineering team, insight into what is normally just an engineering metric. It gives you a very brilliant overview, I suppose, of what are the main quality issues that are really affecting your app, and perhaps why you're not seeing the performance on your business metrics that you may expect. But having said that, it's still really, really important to recognize that these are still engineering quality metrics. It's up to your engineering team to actually fix the issues that Vitals identifies. Therefore, it's really, really crucial that your engineering team actually is using Vitals and is going into the Play console and is looking through there, going through all of the metrics that we have available to see what issues are coming up, because those are the guys that can fix it. So for all of those here who didn't put their hand up just now, come join the 100,000 developers, including, I think, about half, maybe more than half of the developers that I saw just now that are using Vitals already. So I just want to do a quick overview of what's in Vitals today and a few things that we launched recently, and then I'll go into a bit more detail about what we're launching today. So Android Vitals is split into 5 different performance areas. So we have stability, battery, rendering, and then since Google I/O, we added app startup time and also permissions. Now, within those 5 performance areas, we have 15 different metrics for you. Those metrics are broken down by at least 3 different dimensions. Now, the set of dimension varies from one metric to another, but generally, we have things like operating system version, APK version, release track, so whether it's alpha, beta, or prod, and then there's a few other metrics which are kind of more specific to a particular, a few more dimensions that are more specific to particular metrics. So we have a lot of data that you can really, really delve into here. Let me go into a little bit more detail about the things that we launched at I/O as well. So with app startup time, we're trying to help you provide quick launching apps. So across the 3 different states that an app may be in, we want to allow you to measure how often an app takes too long to render its first frame. So from cold start, if it took 5 seconds or more, then that'll be highlighted on the first metric, and same for warm start and hot start and so forth. So you know when the user is waiting too long to actually get into your app in the first place. We also added permissions. Now, you all know about the dynamic permission model that we added not so long ago to Android. Now, what we find very often is that users, if they are just presented with a permission dialog, hey, I want to use your camera, hey, I want to use your storage, and there's no context for the user, there's no nothing to tell them why they should grant the app this permission, then quite often they'll go, well, no. And your app may not then have the full functionality that you want that user to experience. So this will track how often your users are denying the permissions that you may rely on in your app to provide the full experience. So this is where perhaps you would, if you have a poor performance on this metric, then it's an indicator that you need to add that additional context when you're requesting permissions so you can actually provide the value to the user. What is in it for them? What's really the reason behind granting this permission? We also added category benchmarks. Now, this is where you can compare your Android Vitals performance to that of your competition within the same category. So if, for example, your crash rate is 2%, and you think, well, that's kind of okay. I'm only crashing on 2% of daily sessions. But then you look into the category benchmark, and you see across your category, well, actually, all of your competitors on average, they're crashing 0.1%, 0.2%, something much, much lower than you are. Then you know that you are well behind and that you need to catch up with your competition. We also added Anomaly Detection. Now, this is really, really, really powerful. This will send you an alert when any of your metrics, or excuse me, 4 of your metrics, app not responding, crash, excessive wake up, and partial background wake clocks, when they start trending upwards, or perhaps even when they're spiking, maybe you've done a new release, or you've enabled a new feature server-side or something, and all of a sudden your crash rate goes through the roof. This will send you an alert so that you can take action on that as soon as you possibly can. It requires you to go into the console and sign up for this alert. Make sure your engineering teams in particular go and do that so that they receive these alerts and they can take action before your users start complaining. Then the last thing we announced at Google I/O is Core Vitals. Now, there's 15 different metrics in Android Vitals today. Now, we identified some of those that are particularly important to the user experience. These are the ones you see on the screen here. So they are crash rate and ANR rate, which are from the stability performance area, and then partial background wake clocks and excessive wake-ups, which are from the battery sort of resource usage performance area. Now, the reason we did this is because these, as I said, these are the ones that are most important to the user experience. Now, there's a lot of metrics there, 15, but these are the ones that we have prioritized in order to help you prioritize. We've also added an additional piece of information to each of these metrics, which we call the bad behavior threshold. This is essentially the line in the sand for the store as a whole. If you're below the bad behavior threshold, then you can consider your app to be performing well on that metric. And then we have one defined for each of the core vitals there. If you're above it, then that means you need to fix that metric, and you need to do it pretty quickly. Now, I wanted to go in a little bit more detail as well about what Tian referred to earlier that we're launching today. So this is where we're linking Android Vitals with pre-launch reports. Now, pre-launch reports, if you're not familiar with it, is a system built into the Play console where we take your app and run it on real devices sitting in a data center on what we call the Firebase Cloud Test Lab, and we automatically navigate through that app and see what the app does. We record screenshots, we record video, we capture stack traces if it crashes, we capture video of it crashing if it does, we capture the logs, and we capture a lot more metadata than you'll typically find in Android Vitals, because Vitals is pulling its data from real users in the real world, and there's a lot of privacy implications of what we can pull and what we can't. So if a particular crash has already been identified by pre-launch reports, then that crash will be linked to in the Android Vitals UI now. So you'll have all of that metadata available to you, so you can really figure out much more quickly how to action and fix that crash that is occurring. Similarly, we've updated pre-launch reports to make that link in the other direction also. If pre-launch reports has identified a crash that is actually already happening on production devices, as I said, real users, real world, then you will see that in the pre-launch reports UI as well. So this will allow you to prioritize the crashes that have been identified in pre-launch reports and really work on the ones first that are actually affecting real users. So now I want to hand over to Fergus. He's going to tell you a lot more about why you should really, really pay attention to your vitals. Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Fergus Hurley, and I'm the product manager for Android Vitals. Hands up here who wants more 5-star ratings and less 1-star ratings. Okay. Hopefully everyone, unless you're working for one of your competitors. So we learned a lot of lessons over the last year from developers who have actually improved their vitals. And I'm here to share some of those lessons with you today. Feel free to keep your phones out and take photos of these lessons. So we did analysis over all the reviews on Google Play in English. And what we found is that when users are talking about performance and stability issues, they talk about them 40% of the time when they leave a 1-star review. And when people leave a 5-star review, they're talking about speed, design, and usability over 70% of the time. So we all know that performance is important, and we feel it when our apps on our phones don't actually behave correctly. But here we have the data to show how important it is to users. And if you want to be able to improve your rating, you need to be able to focus on these areas yourself. As said, we've been learning from developers over the past year, and developers have been using our tools. And as a result, we've actually seen improvements in the ecosystem. So we've seen a nice bump in users talking about speed, design, and usability over the past year when leaving 5-star reviews. But more importantly, we've seen a large reduction of users talking about stability and bugs and resource usage, which includes battery and memory usage, when leaving 1-star reviews. Now let's jump into some examples of developers who have been improving their stability of their application. So the team behind Merge Dragons, the very popular Zynga game, was able to reduce their number of 1-star reviews by over 50% by being able to use vitals to pinpoint issues within their application. This enabled them to be able to boost their user engagement while saving their engineering team a lot of time in terms of debugging issues. The Tap Games team was able to reduce their A&R rate by over 80% because they were able to pinpoint a specific set of devices that were actually having an A&R issue. And A&Rs are unique to the Play console. This is where your application is not responding, and the Android platform is able to detect that. And this is not reported in many other performance reporting tools, and I really encourage you to check out the A&R section of the Play console so you can be able to deliver a more responsive application to your users. Reddit, the very popular app, was able to reduce their crash rate by 75% using Android Vitals. But more importantly, as a result of the here benchmarks that we actually have available, where you can see how you compare with other apps in your category, as Gavin mentioned earlier, they were able to understand that now they're one of the top applications out there in terms of being very stable. And this enabled them to be able to share that data with other people within their company so that the engineering team was able to say, hey, it was worthwhile for us to invest in improving our stability over the past few months because now we're one of the most stable apps out there. Another feature that Gavin mentioned earlier was anomaly detection. This is where you can be able to get alerted when you have a major change in the performance of your application. The team behind Lovo had signed up for anomaly alerts. And when they had a spike, which increased their A&R rate by 94%, they immediately got alerted about that using Android Vitals, and then were able to disable an ad SDK that was causing that issue, be able to work with that SDK to fix the issue, and then be able to release the fixed app that reduced their A&R rate back down to its previous level, and deliver on maximizing their monetization again. Now, we don't think you should give up working on features and improving the application in other ways, but we do think that you can do focused effort on performance. And here you can see a quote from the ABA English team, which spent 1 quarter focusing on performance improvements, and that resulted in a 4.6-star rating for their application. Obviously, you need to do more than just have good vitals to have a 4.6-star rating application. You need a really great application. And we know for sure, though, that you will never get a 4.6-star rating app if you have terrible vitals. Cool. So I've given some great examples of individual app developers who've improved their performance. We also looked at the developers who had engaged most in the Play console since Google I/O amongst our top developers. And what we found is that they reduced their crash rate by 50% over the past few months. And this is really great because this results in a much better experience for Android end users. We have 3 billion plus active installs that are much more stable as a result of this top 10% of our developers. So great that these other developers are having success using Vitals, but is this really impacting me and my business? Well, we looked at apps that actually have a high crash rate. And as Tian mentioned earlier, users who have a higher crash rate leave 52% more one-star ratings than users with a lower crash rate, and 22% more one-star ratings with a higher A&R rate. Great, so that finishes the stability and bugs side of things. Now we're going to move on to the resource usage side. So resource usage is battery, memory, network usage, and a lot of these metrics are interrelated. So one of the metrics we have under battery in the Play Console Android Vitals section is excessive network use. Now this is bad for end users in two ways. One is that you're consuming their data plan, which might be very expensive for that user. And two, it consumes their battery unnecessarily. The two metrics to pay most attention to, though, in this area are the core vitals that Gavin mentioned. The core vitals in battery being excessive wake-ups and stuck wake locks in the background. The Jalmo team was able to reduce their excessive wake-up rate by 70%. And just look at this quote for a second here. So they appreciate the visibility and diagnostics tools that Android Vitals provides, because very few tools out there actually help you be able to understand how your battery is being used on end users' devices. And what they say is they wouldn't have even noticed or been able to fix this issue without Android Vitals. So really encourage you and your teams to be able to use Android Vitals to be able to understand how are you impacting users' batteries. Great, so now we've covered how you can avoid those one-star ratings. And as I said, we've increased the number of users talking about these 5-star performance areas over the past year, but we want to now over the next year see an even larger increase in users talking about these things. And so let's jump into some of the metrics that we have to be able to help with that. The Mercado Libre team, which is behind one of the most popular e-commerce destinations in Latin America, if not the most popular, was able to use Android Vitals to be able to understand how are their permission requests being appreciated by users. And what they saw is that when they built this new feature into their application, they required this permission to be enabled, that their permission denial rate was much higher than other apps in their category. And so they worked on redesigning their application and changing their strategy for how they requested that permission. And as a result, they were able to increase the users who were able to get access to that feature and reduce their permission denial rate. Now, the Mercado Libre team is a pretty large team. It's hundreds of engineers working on it there, and on their application, they have many teams working on different parts. And as a result, one team introduced an issue into the application that caused a regression in the startup time. But by keeping an eye on their Android Vitals, they were able to understand that this happened and then work with that team to actually be able to debug that issue and reduce back their startup time to what it was previously. Startup time is really important, and Android Vitals measures the startup time from when the app is first interactive. Now, there's a lot of other parts of your application that you might consider and that users might consider to be part of the startup as well. And so the Lovo team used Android Vitals and Firebase performance monitoring to be able to understand how the performance was throughout the whole lifecycle. And what they found is that their actual performance was terrible. So they actually rewrote their whole sign-up and login process and reduced the startup time that's reflected in Vitals and in Firebase performance monitoring. Now, I think it's important to point out here, why would you use Firebase performance monitoring and Android Vitals? Well, where does Android Vitals get its data is the core question to that. So Android Vitals is based on the data that comes from the Android platform itself. And this is powered by the hundreds of millions of users who have opted into sharing their data with Google and you, our partners. The Firebase performance monitoring tool is based on you instrumenting your own application and you then being able to collect data at certain points in your application. And it fundamentally comes down to timers and counters in the Firebase performance monitoring tool. And so if you want to be able to really track these performance pieces that are important to getting a 5-star rating, I really encourage you to use Firebase Performance Monitoring or another performance monitoring tool in your application itself to be able to track individual events that you really care about. Great. We've covered some case studies from many different stakeholders here today. And on the top right here, you can see some of the core people that you would expect to have been using performance data historically, except for it was very difficult for these people to be able to get the performance data in the past. So we have an Android engineer, head of mobile engineering, and a product manager. One of the things that I'm most proud of with Android Vitals is how it's changed the conversation around app performance in companies. And now we have many stakeholders outside of the core engineering team working on the application using performance metrics, or as Gavin mentioned, these engineering metrics. So we had quotes in the presentation from lead mobile product manager, a CTO, a VP of product, and a COO even. And so as we all know, quality across the whole Android ecosystem is improving. And if you and your whole entire company are not looking at your performance of your application and these technical metrics, then you're going to be left behind. Okay, I've got one last study that we did. This just shows how increased quality equals increased engagement. What we did is we looked at games that had users with a really high crash rate and users who had a low crash rate across the same game. And what we found is that users had 2.5 minutes less engagement in the app when they had a high crash rate. And this trend was even stronger for users who had a high ANR rate. Now, this equates to, if a user was playing your game every single day, to about 20 hours a year of less engagement time in your game. And we all know time is money. So really focusing on increasing your quality will increase the engagement in your product. Great, so we're actually going to open it up for questions right now. So I think there's mics around if anybody wants to ask a question. And Gavin, you want to come back up and wait? That's it. If you put your hand up, they'll bring a mic to you. Yeah.
Okay.
No questions?
We answered it all.
Any questions? No? Okay, great. So we're going to be around throughout the day. You can catch us during the breaks. We'll also be in the blue room at 12:30, and you can come chat to us there. There's resources at this link here where you can be able to learn more about Vitals and be able to improve your application. We also would like to thank everyone that we were able to share case studies from today, and we hope that you will work on improving your application so that we can be able to share case studies of your success in our talk next year. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Jan.